In the book of Joshua, we've made it to Joshua chapter 13, and we're moving into the section of the book where Joshua will divide the land. Joshua chapter 13 goes back into history a little bit, and it talks about the land east of the Jordan River. You'll see it highlighted here with Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. We'll talk about these three tribes today, and how Moses settled these tribes on the east side of the river. But that's not the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is all of this land that's here's the Jordan River right here. And the land of Canaan is all this river on the west side of the Jordan. If you hear me say Trans-Jordan, trans means over the Jordan. This is all the Trans-Jordan area. It's on what I would call the wrong side of the Jordan River. It's not what God called the Promised Land. Israel didn't enter the Promised Land until Joshua crossed the Jordan River and set up camp at Gilgal. So that's what we're talking about now. Israel in the book of Joshua, Joshua has been their military leader. Joshua has gone across the river with the men of Israel, the fighting men of Israel. They've all crossed the river. They've gone into conquest. They've battled from the center. Then they went south, and then we saw the battle move to the north. And God, what He did under Joshua and the united army was take the legs out from under the Canaanites. He killed all the heads of the Canaanites. He killed the major cities, and He killed the major kings. So that no matter what would happen in the future, there wasn't enough military strength in the land of Canaan. There wasn't enough military strength in Canaan to kick Israel out. Israel had defeated the authority, the power structure in the land of Canaan, so they were there to stay. But it doesn't mean that Joshua defeated everybody. When there was one army moving around in the land of Canaan, the Israeli army under Joshua, they did not conquer everybody in the land. They didn't kill everything that breathed the way God told them to. That was going to take a much longer time. And what we're seeing here in Joshua 13 is this movement of each territory. You see all the names. Those names are familiar. They're the sons of Jacob. Asher and Naphtali starting from the top, and Zebulun and Issachar and Manasseh, Dan, Ephraim, Benjamin, Judah, Simeon, Gad and Reuben. These are the sons of Jacob. These are the 12 tribes of Israel. But God would give them borders. I mean, we have a border dispute right now at our southern border, and we wonder, is God a God of borders or is God a God of open borders? And even within the nation Israel, the land of Canaan, the promised land, we see that God very definitely is a God of borders. Not only does Israel have the land of Canaan, but each tribe only gets a certain portion of land. They don't get all the land. They're not made to walk all throughout the land. The sons of Naphtali, if you're in the family, in the tribe of Naphtali, your great-grandfather, you can't come down here and live in Jerusalem just because you feel like it. Because there's a better job opportunity in the city of Bethlehem. You can't choose that. You have a tribal territory where your people are supposed to live from now until the Lord comes back. That is your territory, and it has borders. So God's got a borders, and we see that in Joshua chapter 13. So this is what the map will look like eventually. If you could put 100 maps of the tribes of Israel and their territories, one on top of the other, and they would all be slightly different. I mean slightly. They may take this curve out going here in the plain of Israel in the Jezreel Valley, and they may cut off that little top piece of yellow and give it to Asher. Who cares? Who cares? We do the best we can with the cities that the Bible mentions. A lot of these places we historically don't know where they were. It's as simple as that. I mean, we're talking about several thousand years ago now, and some of these place names just don't exist on our maps, and archaeologists haven't dug deep enough to find them. They're working on it, but some of them we just don't know where they were. So I'm not interested in the names of all the cities. We're not going to cover the names of most of these cities. when we get to all the different tribal areas in the next 4 or 5 chapters of Joshua. We're just going to cover the big scene here. Look what it says in Joshua chapter 13. What does God want us to know about this time period? Joshua was old. He was advanced in years. He'd done his work as the commander-in-chief of the Israeli army. Here we have an old man, Joshua, and the Lord said to him, "You're old. You're advanced in years, and very much of the land remains to be possessed." Remember what I just said. Joshua went in there with the Israeli army, the unified army, and cut off the head of the snake. He took the authority, the power away from the land of Canaan and handed it to Israel. But there was many people in the land that needed still to be conquered. Unfortunately, the word is killed. So he says there's very much of the land yet to be possessed. Look what he says in verse 2. We'll just go over it quickly. Doesn't matter where these places are if you don't know. I'm not so much interested in the geography, but make sure of the fact that everywhere he names is all of this area. Who mentioned the Philistines? I think he might mention the Hittites in a minute. But he's going through all this area. He says in the west, there are these places. In the south, there are these places. In the north, there are all these places where you still need to conquer. Let's see how he does it. Look what he says. This is the land that remains. All the region of the Philistines. So under Joshua and the united Israeli army, not all the Philistines were killed. Not all their land was taken. This would happen over time. All the regions of the Philistines, those are the Geshurites from Sihor, which is east of Egypt. So we're way down south now. Even as far as the border of Ekron to the north. So he's gone north to south. He says all along the Mediterranean coast, from north to south, or from south to north in the land, a lot of people still need to be dispossessed. The 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazite, the Ashdodite, the Eshkelonite, the Gittite, the Ekronite, the Aphite to the south. He's just naming places to show the vastness of the peoples that still need to be conquered. To the south, all the land of the Canaanite, the Merah that belongs to the Sidonians. Where is Sidon? Look where he's at all of a sudden. Way up here at the top of the map, he's talking about the Sidonians. From north to south, from east to west, he just names people after people. As far as Aphek, to the border of the Amorite, the land of the Gebelite, he just keeps naming places. All of Lebanon. Lebanon, modern day Lebanon, is north. It's right here. Can't see it, but it would be above here on the coast. That's Lebanon. Toward the east, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon. So now he's moved from here over to the east, over here, the Mount Hermon area around Dan, up in the northern parts, but he's pushed east. Mount Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath, all the inhabitants of the hill country. Now he's moved central, the hill country of Judah, the Judean hillside. He's just saying everywhere in the land there are peoples that need to still be conquered. It's not been done. It's not finished. So he says all the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon as far as Mishperoth Maim, all the Sidonians. And this is God's statement concerning all these people. No matter where they are on the map in the land of Canaan, God is still involved in the fight. The land belongs to Israel, and God is here by Jacob giving the land to Israel, taking it from the Canaanites, planting Israel in the land. So God says, I will drive them out before the sons of Israel. I'm not finished. I'm not finished what I started with Moses. I'm not finished what I started with you, Joshua. I will continue because I want everything in the land of Canaan killed. Everything that breathes, man, woman, and child. We're going to start pure. We're going to drive out all these pagan idolaters. So he says, I'm going to drive them out of the land, but to what end? Why are you going to drive all these people out of the land? Because he wants Joshua to allot the land, to portion out the land to Israel. He says, only allot it to Israel for an inheritance as I have commanded you. So we can see from these first few verses that the clear truth it's clear that Joshua and the unified army of Israel, when they were one army, 600,000 strong, when they were one army, they didn't come close to clearing everybody out of the land of Canaan. Look at all the lands that God Himself has just mentioned to Joshua that still need to be possessed. It wasn't God's intention to move everybody out of the land quickly. It was to be a slower effort so that Israel could get a planting, a foothold in the land. We looked at a couple of verses about that last time. But what's going to happen to the major armies of Israel now? The conquests are completed. The head of the snake has been cut off. The power in the land of Canaan has been taken from the kings of the land and given to Israel. So the army was going to disperse into tribal armies. We see the people that lived east of the river in the Transjordan. We see the men of Gad and the men of Reuben and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They moved back to be with their families. They went back across the river. The war is over. So they went back across the river and they settled in their territories that Moses had given them. And so now you're going to have all these little tribal armies, an army of Asher and an army of Naphtali and an army of Judah that are going to go into their lands and continue the conquest in a smaller way and get control of these lands by killing the people that are there. So the army of Israel is going to divide into 12 smaller tribes again. They're going to disperse and go to their own lands. Each of the smaller tribal army then was going to be responsible for clearing out the people in the land that were still there. Verse 7 says, "Now therefore apportion this land." That's why we have this map on the board. That's what he's talking about, apportion. Section it off for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Apportion the land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Well, you heard me just say 12 tribes. Because Jacob had 12 sons. But remember, on the Transjordan side, on the east side of the river, and Moses will remind Joshua of this, God will remind Joshua of this, that Moses, before God took him, Moses settled 2.5 of the tribes. Joshua is responsible for settling the other 9.5 tribes. That's why it says here, 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So he's telling Joshua, finish the job I put before you. Divide the land among the tribes of Israel. And then he goes back in verse 8 and reminds Joshua of the work that Moses had done. As almost to give an example. This is how Moses did it, Joshua. This is what I'm asking you to do. In verse 8 it says, with the other half-tribe, the other half of Manasseh, notice that Manasseh is cut in half. They're a huge people, but the Jordan River cuts them in half. So half of the tribe of Manasseh lived east of the river, and half of them lived in the promised land west of the river. That's what he's talking about, the half-tribe. That's the half-tribe of Manasseh. With the other half-tribe, the Reubenites and the Gadites, they received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond the Jordan to the east, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave to them. So he's reminding them, Moses already did it for 2.5 tribes. I need you to do it for the other 9.5 tribes. But here's a question, and it's going to come up over and over as we go through the rest of the book of Joshua. Did Israel do what God asked them to do? Did Israel clear out the land? Did they kill, as harsh as it may sound, did they kill everything that breathed, everything that was living, every man, woman, and child? Did they kill all the pagans, the people that were worshiping false gods? Did they do that so that they could begin a civilization in the land of Canaan purely worshiping one God, the one true God, Yahweh? Did they do that or not? Look what it says in verse 13. They didn't even do it on the east side of the river. It says, but the sons of Israel, we're talking about the sons on the right side of the river, Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh, the sons of Israel did not They didn't do it. The sons of Israel did not dispossess the Geshurites or the Makathites, for Geshur and Makath still live among Israel until this day. So even on the east side of the river, there were people, there were pagans, there were idolaters. And you think, big deal, we live among pagans and idolaters in America today. Big deal. Well, that wasn't the issue then. The issue and the command of God then was kill them all. And the reason is this. If you don't kill all these false God-worshiping people, they're going to drag you away from me, and you're going to start worshiping their false gods. The bad apple is going to spoil the bunch. Israel is not going to lift these pagans out of paganism so that they will begin worshiping Yahweh, the one true God, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Israel isn't going to pull them into worshiping God. What's going to happen is the pagans are going to drag Israel down to worship their false gods, gods that don't exist. And God knew it. God warned them of it over and over and over through Moses. God warned them of that. If you keep these people in the land, they will be a burr under your saddle. They are going to tempt you, and you're going to fall to the worship of their gods. And in verse 14, you say, okay, you've got all these tribal names. You've got the 9.5 tribes. Joshua, go out and give the 9.5 tribes their land. You've got these other 2.5 tribes that God has just told Joshua, Moses settled these tribes. And then you have this statement about the tribe of Levi that almost seems to come out of nowhere. Look what it says in verse 14. Only the tribe of Levi do not give an inheritance. And you think, wait a minute, what did the tribe of Levi do that was bad that keeps them from getting an inheritance? Look at the names again. Look at what you read here. Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, Manasseh, Dan, Ephraim, Benjamin, Gad, Reuben, Judah, Simeon. Do you read Levi anywhere there? No territory for Levi. Levi was the third son of Jacob. He was the third son of Jacob. But why does God say only to the tribe of Levi, the Levites we call them, give no inheritance? It's because God's given them something better than a simple piece of earthly real estate. These other tribes are getting a piece of real estate to call their own. But Levi was singled out, and this is what God gave Levi instead of dirt. He says, the offerings by fire to the Lord, the God of Israel, are their inheritance, as he spoke to him. So the Levites are not singled out because of something bad. The Levites are singled out because of something good. Levi is the third son of Jacob. So we have to ask the question, if there's one tribe out of the 12 that's lifted up higher than the others, why is that? Why did God choose the sons of Levi to be the priests? Why did God choose the sons of Levi to be the mediators between humans, between Israeli people, and God himself? Why does this tribe Levi stand between them? Why does a Jewish man from Manasseh bring his sin offering to a Levite, and the Levite in turn gives it to God by fire? Why the Levite? Why do they get this special treatment? Look what it says in Numbers chapter 1. I'm going to show you a few verses. Why did Yahweh choose Levi to serve him in the worship in the tabernacle instead of Ephraim or Dan or any of the other tribes? Why Levi? Look what the Bible says. The Levites, however, remember the book of Numbers. It starts with the numbering of Israel. How many men of war are there in Israel? There were 603,550. That was the number. And God counted in the book of Numbers, God counted Israel because he was going to send them into the land of Canaan. They were ready to go across into the land of Canaan. God was going to lead them into the land of Canaan to start the conquest. But we remember the story that they sent in 12 spies. And 10 of the spies came back and said they're too big They're giants in the land. Their cities are too fortified. We cannot beat them in battle. So the God told that cowardice generation, you will all die in the wilderness. I'm never, ever, ever going to allow you to cross into the land of Canaan again. Because you don't trust me. You're afraid of a giant human being. You're afraid of a strong city. You don't understand who I am. And you're not going into the land. Your children, who you fear if I take into the land right now, will all be slaves to these giant people in the land of Canaan. I'm going to send your children into the land later. That's the story of the book of Numbers in a nutshell. You got a 40-year period in the book of Numbers where instead of going into the land, we count funeral after funeral of all these 603,000 men that die in the wilderness, except for two great men, Joshua and his friend Caleb, who were the two spies that said, no, we can take the land. If Yahweh is with us, who can be against us? We need to mobilize and go into the land now. At the beginning of the book of Numbers, this is what it says in verse 47, chapter 1. The Levites, however, the third son of Jacob, he had a man named Levite. He named him Levi. And his descendants are called the Levites. The Levites were not numbered among them by their father's tribe. They weren't counted as part of Israel's army. He didn't count them. They weren't part of the 603,550 men. And you ask, why? Why were the Levites not part of the army? For the Lord had spoken to Moses, and this is what the Lord decreed. Only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor shall you take their census among the sons of Israel. Look what it says in the next verse. So what then are the Levites going to do if they're not going to fight in war? You shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle, the worship center of Israel. They are to be my priests, my mediators, my go-betweens between the men of Israel and myself. The Levites will stand as the priests. You shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the promise, the testimony, the covenant, over all its furnishings, over all that belongs to it. The Levites are in complete control of the worship center and everything that goes on in it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings, and they shall take care of it. They and they only. Only the Levites. They shall also camp around the tabernacle, as if to insulate the tribes of Israel that camped all around the tabernacle. The Levites made the first band around the temple when they camped over those 40 years in the wilderness. The Levites insulated all of the other tribes of Israel from God. You wonder, what is so special about these Levites? Why would God choose them? Is He just a predestining God that in His oracles in times past has said, I'm going to choose them for no reason? I'm just going to choose them because that's how I want it to be? Or is there an issue, is there an instance where the Levites showed themselves to be something different than the other tribes of Israel? Do you remember a time? Anything coming to mind where the Levites may have presented themselves as worshipers of Yahweh instead of worshipers of anything else? Look what it says in the book of Exodus. Moses has been on Mount Sinai with the presence of God. God has given Moses the 10 commandments and all of the rest of them, 613 commandments in all. And Moses finally comes down off of Mount Sinai. God says, go down, Moses, because your people, the people that you led out of Egypt, are worshiping, not me, they're worshiping a false god, a god that they've made. So God sends Moses down Mount Sinai, and this is what Moses finds at the base of the mountain. Again, while it's one of the great ironies in the book. while God is telling Moses how Israel is to worship Him, how they're to be distinct from all the other people on the earth, how all the nations of the earth are going to be drawn to worship Yahweh, the one true God, because of how Israel does it and how God blesses Israel and the intimacy of the relationship between God and Israel. It's to draw all the nations of the earth to Yahweh, to worship Yahweh. And look what's happening. While those instructions are being given, the foolish Israelites at the base of the mountain are carving a golden calf image. Look what it says, Exodus 32:19. And it came about as soon as Moses came near the camp that he saw the calf, the golden calf, that his brother Aaron, who would be high priest, another irony, God's on the mountain telling Moses, your brother Aaron, Moses, and I mean brothers, same mother, same father, brother, biological father, your brother Moses and his sons, I am calling to be the high priests of Israel. Not just the Levi, not just are they from the tribe of Levi, but they're going to stand head and shoulders above all spiritual men that will ever come. They will be my high priests. They will enter into my very presence one day a year on the Day of Atonement. And what is Brother Aaron doing? While God is giving him the greatest gift, the greatest position on earth to be high priest to God, Aaron's down at the base of the mountain, having called in all the gold from the women, all the earrings, all the gold that they brought out of the land of Canaan. And Aaron, the high priest to come, has melted all this gold and built a false god for Israel. The ironies are so thick and so pathetic. It came about as soon as Moses came near the camp, he saw the calf, the calf that his brother Aaron had made, and he saw the dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. So Moses comes down the mountain with these tablets of the law. Tell me what's the first thing that those tablets would have said? What's the headline on the tablets? What's line 1 on the tablets? It's commandment number 1. And what is it? What's commandment number 1? 10 commandments. No other gods. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods beside me. And what does Moses see the second he sees his people, Israel? You've got other gods before you. Here he's got these tablets that are trying to purify Israel and make them a worshiping body of God. And instead they've already fallen into idolatry. And they've already, before Moses even gives them the truth of these things. Remember, God had already spoken to all Israel at the base of the mountain. They heard the voice of God in Exodus chapter 20 when He gave the command, I am Yahweh your God, and you shall have no other gods before me. All Israel heard it. All Israel knew it. And a few weeks later, they were already building a calf and falling down and worshiping it, dancing around, having parties. And so what did Moses do? He destroyed those tablets of the law. I'm not going to present these tablets of the law to you as if you're worthy. You're pagans. You're already worshiping false gods. You say, what does this have to do with the Levites? Look what it says, a couple of verses down. When Moses saw that the people were out of control, for Aaron, his brother, had let them get out of control to be a derision among their enemies. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp, and he said, whoever is for Yahweh, come to me. Not that abomination of a golden calf that my foolish brother made, but whoever wants to worship Yahweh, whoever has not bowed the knee to that calf, gather. And who showed up? Sons of Levi. All the sons of Levi gathered together with them. They were his family members. Moses was a Levite. Aaron was a Levite. Aaron had a weak moment, a moment of foolishness. He was the one that led all Israel into this worship of the golden calf. But he couldn't get the sons of Levi, his family members, his brothers, he couldn't get them to go along with him. So on this day, when Israel had just come out of Egypt very recently, and they've already bowed down to false gods, the sons of Levi said, we'll have no part of it. They worshiped Yahweh. So you wonder when you go down the road, why does God lift up the Levites? Why did God choose the Levites? Because of the Levites. Because the Levites chose Him. Because the Levites worshiped Him. And if the sons of Levi won't give in to the pressure to bow down and worship something other than Him, those are His men for the job. That's why the Levites aren't given a piece of dirt. The Levites are given an eternal priesthood. A priesthood. They would lead Israel in worship of God. They would take the sacrifices that God would give, or that God would demand of Israel, the calves, the lambs, the goats, the turtle doves, all the sacrificial system. Nothing was killed and nothing was burned and offered to God that didn't go through the hands of the sons of Levi. Levi. Great tribe of people, not without their problems, but the chosen tribe of God because of who they were, because of what they had chose. So back to Joshua 13, the Levites are the priests, all of them, all of the tribe of Levi. Every man, every person in the tribe of Levi was set aside by God to serve Him in worship, in the tabernacle service, in the keeping of animals, all of these things. It was up to the Levites. That's what they were doing. Later we know the tabernacle was replaced by the temple in Jerusalem. But it would be these Levites, these priests, who were the ones that were in the temple service. No one else, no other tribe. There never was a person from the tribe of Judah or Zebulun or Dan or Asher. No one ever entered the temple, ever, in worship of God. The Levites, the sons of Levi, only. So they were not given a territory for their families. These men would be, or these people, men, women, and their children, they would be spread out throughout all the tribal territories. Levi didn't have a piece of dirt. They lived in several cities among all the other tribes. And you can look at that if you want to write this down. We're not going to go there, but you can find this in 1 Chronicles chapter 6. In 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 54, all the way to the end of the chapter, verse 81. 1 Chronicles 6, 54 to 81, it talks about the Levitical cities. And in the tribe of Dan, the Levites were given, and it names all the towns that the Levites were given and their surrounding farmlands. And then it goes to the tribe of Judah. In the tribe of Judah, in the territory of Judah, all the Levites were given these particular cities. So the Levites were spread out all throughout the land. They didn't live in one particular area. Verse 15, back in Joshua 13, verse 15. So Moses, remember we're on the east side, the Transjordan. So Moses gave an inheritance to the tribes of the sons of Reuben, according to their families. And he lists all the cities. I'm not interested in that. Move down to verse 23. Interesting word, border. God's a God of territory. He's a God of borders. He's a God of nations. You can read that in the book of Acts. The border of the sons of Reuben was the Jordan. This was the inheritance of the sons of Reuben according to their families, the cities, and their villages. So God gave a very distinct piece of real estate to the sons of Reuben. They couldn't go settle anywhere they wanted to. God appointed them a place on earth. In verse 24, Moses also gave an inheritance to the tribe of Gad. They had borders also, according to their families. This, in verse 28, forget the cities. This is the inheritance of the sons of Gad. So Moses was giving these plots of land, these inheritances, to these different tribes. So the son of Reuben got their piece of land with its borders. The tribe of Gad got their piece of land which is with its borders. And look at verse 29. Moses also gave an inheritance to the half tribe of Manasseh. Only half of them, because only half, I don't know how that splits, but only half wanted to stay on the east side of the Jordan. The other half wanted to go across the Jordan into the promised land. So what does Moses do for the half tribe? He gives them an inheritance on the right side, the east side of the river. And it was for the half tribe of the sons of Manasseh according to their families. If you go down to verse 32, God gives Joshua a concluding statement. Moses did everything I asked him to. In verse 32, these are the territories which Moses apportioned for the inheritance in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan at Jericho to the east. Not the city of Jericho, but the east of Jericho, beyond the river. We've seen the map. So he says Moses did his job. Moses apportioned the tribes that I asked him to apportion. Moses gave them their territories, Joshua. Now you need to finish. You need to continue the work and apportion out territories on the west side of the river in the land of Canaan to the rest of the tribes, the 9.5 tribes that remain. They have specific borders. They have a land that I have already decreed and decided that I will give them, and you need to see to it that they get there and that they dispossess all the pagan, false god worshiping idolaters that are in the land and take possession of all of it. All their cities, all their crops, all their fields, all their flocks, all their herds, take all of it from them. This land belongs to Israel. Who does the land belong to today? Does Israel, my question is, just an aside, but does the people Israel, do the Jews today, 2022, do they have a right to this land that we see on that map that God says, give it to Israel? Do they still have a right to the land? Is it still their land? Or did something happen in the history of Israel that God said, okay, I stop my promises to Israel. I will not give them that land. I'm going to take it from them. Maybe because they rejected Jesus Christ as their Messiah. Did something happen in Israel that would have caused God to break His promise, His oath with them, and take the land from them and give it to someone else? What's the answer to that question? No. No, a promise from God, amen, is a promise from God. He's a promise keeper. And this land, regardless of politic, regardless of West Bank, regardless of Gaza Strip, regardless of Golan Heights, it doesn't matter how mankind tries to divide this land belongs to the 12 tribes of Israel and always will. It's Jewish. It's their land. They own it. God made them promises. He did not promise anything to the Arabs or the Palestinians concerning the land of Israel. Nothing in the Bible mentions any of that. What He did say was kick everybody out of the land, remain purely worshipers of me, and let's draw the nations to worship me also, but they wouldn't do it. So these are the territories which Moses apportioned for an inheritance in the plains of Moab to Reuben and to Gad and Manasseh. Verse 33, but to the tribe of Levi, again the mentions of the Levitical priests, but to the tribe of Levi, Moses did not give an inheritance. Moses didn't do it, Joshua. You don't do it. I have called them into my private service. What a privilege to be a priest in Israel. Any of you know a Jew named Cohen? Either C-O-H-N or C-O-H-E-N. A Kohen in Hebrew is a priest. The word Kohen means priest. So even though you may have all these Jews running around that don't know what tribe they're from, God knows exactly what tribe they're from. But if you know any Jews with the last name Cohen or Cohn, C-O-H-N or C-O-H-E-N, they are Levites. They're the priestly family of Israel. What a privilege, and they don't even know it. Most of them don't even know who they are. So unfortunate. The tribe of Levi, Moses did not give an inheritance. Yahweh, the Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance. They've inherited the leadership of worship to Yahweh in all of the world, as He had promised to them. So God is telling Joshua, listen, Moses didn't give the Levites a land because they belong to me. They are my priests. And when you attribute or apportion the 9.5 tribes, don't give a portion to Levi. They are mine. I am their portion and the worship of me. So we've seen 2.5 tribes now take possession of their own lands on the east side of the river. In Joshua chapter 14, we'll move across to the west side of the river into the promised land and read the story next week, a couple of chapters on Caleb, and his taking of his territory in the land of Canaan. But I want to end here, and you think, oh, Rick, let's end on a good note. Well, you just got to finish the story, that's all. We just have to finish the story. We have to be truthful to the Bible. Let the Bible tell its story. So, what does history tell us about this area of land? We read here that Moses gave an inheritance to the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, the sons of Manasseh. It was their land. It should have stayed their land. They should have worshiped God. And everything would have been okay in the land. But I want to push forward in the history of Israel about 600 years. Just for a moment, we're about to stop. Joshua goes into the land, for you date keepers, Joshua goes into the land in 1406 BC. 1406, Joshua crosses the Jordan River with Israel. And what we're going to read about here, I'm going to show you a couple of slides from a king named Jehu. Jehu. And he was the king of Israel, the northern kingdom. I can't tell all the history, but Israel split. And the northern 10 tribes had a series of 19 kings. This was one of them. About king 13 or so. His name was Jehu. And his reign, we know the numbers, 843 to 816. That's when he reigned, about 30 years in Israel. Listen to what the Bible says. The northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, the people that own the land, the people we just saw settled in the book of Joshua, we see that they will reject Yahweh. They won't worship Him only. They've turned aside instead to worship false gods and idols made by human hands. Look what it says in 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 31. I do this because we may never get to 2 Kings. I want you to know what the history of Israel is. Moving forward, what happened in these great territories of Gad and Reuben and Manasseh. In 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 31, we read about their king Jehu. It says, but Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel sin. In those days the Lord began... Now listen to this. You want to grab your hair and say, no! We've just seen Israel settled in the land. The tribes of Gad and Reuben and a half tribe of Manasseh. But you fast forward 580 years or so, and in those days, 580 years later, the Lord began to cut off portions from Israel in discipline because they're idolaters. And Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel. So one word about that in the middle, you say the sins of Jeroboam. Who's Jeroboam? Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. He was their first king, and he led them into idolatry. Look what it says. As for the sins of Jeroboam, the sins of Nebat, which he made Israel sin, from these sins Jehu did not depart. What was the major sin of Jeroboam? Idolatry. Even the golden calves that were at Bethel and at Dan. So in the northern kingdom, Jehu, because he didn't, or Jeroboam, because he didn't want the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and worship, because he thought if the men of Israel go down to Jerusalem to worship, I'll lose them. I'll make 2 worship centers for them. I'll make a worship center at Bethel. I'll make a worship center at Dan. I'll build these beautiful golden calves. I'll build these altars to the calves. And all of my people, the northern kingdom of Israel, can go to these 2 sites and worship false gods there. He set up priests. You think his priests were from the family of Levi? No, they were not. He chose priests from all the other tribes of Israel, and God wasn't having it. And so finally, Jehu, who's sinning the same way that the first king Jeroboam did, he's an idolater. He's not worshiping Yahweh, God. He's worshiping false gods. This is what happened. Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord. He kept in the sins of Jeroboam. What's the next verse after that? What's this land? Look what it says. The Lord began to cut off portions from Israel. What portions? Look at the sadness of this statement. In verse 33, from the Jordan eastward. Isn't that what we've just been talking about? All the land of Gilead, the Gadites. Who were the Gadites? That's Gad. What other land did the Lord cut off from Israel? What land did He take away from Israel and say, I'm not going to let you have it anymore. I'm going to take it from you because you won't worship me. The Reubenites and the Manassites. So the 3 wonderful tribes and their territories that we saw, 500 years go by, 580 years, and because of rampant idolatry in Israel, God takes the land that we just saw Him give them, He takes it back. Not forever. It's a disciplinary act, but He kicks them out of the land. The Gadites, the Reubenites, the Manassites from Eror, which is by the valley of the Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan. So here's just a black and white picture. Here's the River Jordan going from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, splitting the land. And all of this glorious pasture land. Remember why they settled there? It's because the sons of Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh came to Moses. They were flockmen. They were goat herders and sheep herders. And they came to Moses and said, this land is perfect for us. This land is exactly the kind of land we need to do what we do for our flocks. Can we stay here? And Moses turned to the Lord, knowing that they weren't in the land of Canaan yet. And Yahweh said, yes, you can apportion them land here. This was land that they wanted because it worked for their lifestyle as sheep herders and goatsmen. And here, by the time you go 500 years down the road, God takes it right back because of discipline, because of idolatry. So we read in Joshua about God and Gad and Reuben and Manasseh receiving this wonderful blessing of the land that they choose. They chose this themselves, this land. And we will see them in a very short period of time forfeit the land by worshiping things that do not exist. All the false pantheon of gods, they don't even exist. Gad and Reuben and Manasseh would give up territory that Yahweh, the one true God, gifted them. They'd give it up to worship things that aren't even real. It's an astounding story. They gave up God's protection. They gave up Yahweh's land gift. They gave up the knowledge of the miracles that God can do when He had them cross the Jordan River on dry ground. They gave up all of that to worship things that don't exist. It's an astounding bit of Israeli history. Let's close in prayer. We'll pick up in Joshua chapter 14 next time. Father,